Well, so hi and welcome to episode 155 of Level Up. 155, getting quite high up there in the numbers. 60 minutes of live Q&A where your questions drive the show. So we've got Ella and Shanice over in the chat, so please pop in, say hi, let us know the name and the city where you're watching from, and get involved. Get your questions in early, either post them into the chat or by using the QR code, which you'll see popping up on screen from time to time. You can use your mobile phone for that as well. Of course, we will be posting up a link in the chat for you to vote up the questions that you would most like answered, and of course, to add your own in there. So don't feel shy, just get involved. If your question is selected, your name's also going to appear at the credits at the end of the show. So make sure you stay with us to see that happen. So today we are talking about the art of facilitation and how to facilitate like a pro. Now, facilitation is unique, but it's an extremely valuable skill to have. There's no doubt that organizations do benefit greatly by having skilled facilitators on their team. Now, there's a famous quote by Dale Hunter that I really like about facilitation. It's the primary work of the facilitator is done in silence. And to the untrained eye, it may look as if the facilitator is not doing anything at all. Let's hope that we can achieve that goal today. So, how can you develop this really important skill and facilitate like a pro? Well, let's jump in and meet the wonderful panel that we have joining us for today's show. So, welcome everybody. Firstly, I'd like to start off with Louisa. Louisa is a managing partner at Lifting Lanterns. She's also a coach, mentor, and consultant, expert trainer, and speaker in the project delivery space. Done many, many years in senior managerial roles, rolling out organizational change. And I think facilitation is definitely one of her passions. So, welcome.
It's great to be back, Nigel, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, mine too, must say. Thanks, Louisa. Our next panelist is no stranger to Level Up either. Malini, she is a highly experienced business relationship manager, specializes in nurturing, in high-performing BRMs and teams. She's regularly invited to deliver keynotes and presentations at professional and academic forums in Australia, USA, UK, India. So welcome, Malini.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm really delighted to be part of Level Up again. And I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think there's going to be some interesting ones in this. So Julian, welcome, Julian. Julian's Director of Training in Project Management for Thought Nation and becoming more and more of a Level Up regular, I've noticed, which is really great news. He's really good at delivering training, agile PM, praxis, and he's a generalist though. So I think facilitation is one of the key skills that he likes to focus on in his company. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you to all the panelists. Nice to be with you today again, and I'm looking forward to an enjoyable day.
Fantastic. Excellent. And our last panelist for today is Laurie. Laurie has 30 years of experience in engineering and management roles on complex multidiscipline engineering construction projects. He's also a trainer and advisor on planning, assurance, risk management, control projects and programs and portfolios. Now, if you ever needed facilitation experience, it's what you do, Laurie. So welcome.
Yep, thank you very much, Nigel. Really good to be back here on Level Up again and really looking forward to this discussion.
Excellent. And our question master for today is Suchitra Jacob. Suchitra is joining us from the wonderful city of Bangalore. So good morning, Suchitra.
Hello, Nigel, and hello to the panelists and our viewers. Happy to be back again asking questions.
Fantastic. I think with the chat's already going wild, but let's hope we get some interesting questions in from folks today. But let's crack on. Suchitra, let's take our first question.
Sure. So we have a question from Clifford to start us off, who says, it's a very basic question, but is there a difference between a trainer and a facilitator?
Okay, very interesting question. Laurie, why don't you start us off with that one?
Yes, sure. Thank you for that question, Clifford. There is a bit of an overlap between being a trainer and a main difference is for a trainer, their intention is to impart knowledge onto the audience, onto the trainees, if you like. Whereas with a facilitator, most often, you're possibly the dumbest person in the room, and your job is really to facilitate the exchange of ideas and information between the participants. So the participants would normally be the experts when you're a facilitator.
Fantastic, fantastic. Malini, let's hear your thoughts on it, and then we'll hear from Julian.
Thank you, Clifford, for a great question to get us started. I agree with what Laurie has just said, and I think I wear both hats, but it depends on the context. So when I'm delivering a certification course, for example, there's a defined syllabus. I need to help the participants understand all the content and then be able to do the exam. And so I'd be wearing my trainer hat. But when I'm running a workshop or a brainstorming session or a meeting, then I'm a facilitator. And as Laurie said, I might not be the subject matter expert. And my role is to actually bring out all the wisdom that is in the room and help the participants to actually achieve, come to an agreement or achieve an outcome themselves.
Fantastic. Good answer, Malini. Thank you. Julian, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Not much to add to that. Malini and Laurie are absolutely right about the trainer delivering some structured content for learning, and then a facilitator working with a group dynamic more than anything to provide some kind of participation, as much participation as possible as well. But these roles overlap very often. So a trainer uses facilitation skills quite often to deliver successful training, and a facilitator could also use training skills to be able to deliver content and be able to provide some learning as well. So they're very, very complementary roles.
Excellent. Yeah, well. I agree with you there. Totally agree with you. Louisa, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I just want to exactly add to what everyone has already said, is that it does complement each other. But I think the trainer is more about just purely the subject knowledge, and you're sharing the subject knowledge, whilst the facilitator can get in there and not know anything. And you're really just there about the process and how to get to that outcome. So I think we've got to really be clear that sometimes as a facilitator, you're going in to make sure that people are doing what they're doing, writing things on post-it notes and getting to an outcome without actually answering any questions. So the trainer, always there to help and answer questions as well.
Good point. Absolutely. Very, very good point. I think that one of the things that facilitators should have really a unique skill in is firstly listening to folks, to really understand what's going on in the room. I'm not talking about training here. Training, of course, you need to do that anyway. Right? But as a facilitator, you absolutely need to understand what people are trying to get to. What are those common goals? And try to bring out the best in people. There's quite often conflicts, personal politics, company politics. They all play a role in the outcome of those meetings, right? And your role as a facilitator is not to get involved in that, but to try to hear them out, understand what they are, their concerns, questions, and so on. Not answering the questions, but help them to reach the correct conclusions and therefore the appropriate outcome for, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve there. Fantastic question, Clifford. Suchitra, may we move on to our next question, please?
Our next question is from Angela Agatha. Do you need to have public speaking skills to make a good presentation?
That's a good question. Do you need to have public speaking skills to do this? Julian, what are your thoughts? And then we'll move on to Laurie.
I think it's just very beneficial that if you have good public speaking skills, what it helps you to do is to be able to communicate very, very clearly. So you are able to articulate ideas clearly and effectively, very importantly. But then you're also able to engage very nicely with your audience that you're working with, as well as bringing a lot of confidence into an environment if you have a really good public speaking skill.
Fair enough. Good point. Definitely. Laurie?
Yes, Julian, to have good public speaking skills, so people listen and communicate in different ways. Some people are very auditory focused, but for others, they're very visual focused or very kinesthetic, like doing things hands-on. So it's not everything to being a good facilitator or presenter, but it certainly is one of those core skills that are very useful to have.
Yeah, I agree. Louisa, I think, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I might want to play devil's advocate here. So I might actually want to say it's not as necessary as people think, as long as people are prepared and practiced. I think lots of people go into a presentation thinking they've got good presentation skills and good public speaking skills, but they're not prepared. So they end up downfall is it's just So I think it's actually more important that you are prepared and you practice and you know your content and you've actually thought about your audience and thought about what's coming, rather than just making sure you've got good public speaking skills.
You make a very good point here, actually. When you think about it, people with public speaking skills often tend to dominate. And there is a natural tendency for those people who can stand up and deliver effective content in a public environment to want to dominate the conversation. So because they speak well, they always think they should be speaking. And in a facilitation role, it's not necessarily what you need to be doing. You need to be listening a lot more than you need to be speaking. Having said that, I think there's an argument for both sides, right? So if you are able to articulate and the content that you are in that meeting for very well, that does help. But never forget the core purpose of why you're there. Yeah? It's not to deliver content necessarily. So good points. All right, so I can see the social chat is going absolutely wild here. Charlotte, wow, Abhishek, welcome. Hi, thanks for joining us. We've got so many folks joining here. Wojciech, that's also great. Hey, from Poland, wonderful. Hope you're enjoying the show. And we've got Lee here. Lee, hi, fellow South African, welcome. This is a really full Southern Hemisphere panel today. So it's literally everybody on the show today is from the Southern Hemisphere. So sorry, Northern Hemisphere folks. Rohit, hi, welcome. Welcome from India. All right. Suchitra, may we move on?
Sure. Our next question is from Steve. Does facilitation also work with translation or interpreters if I speak another language than the group?
Very, very good question. How do you handle multiple languages when people do not understand what isn't their native language? Julian, what are your thoughts on this?
Probably exactly what Louisa said. Preparation. So it's really important, if you are going to be working with translators, to prepare the translators, help them to understand what you are going to be presenting or talking about, helping them understand key terminology that may be, particular to the topic that you're going to be talking about. It's really important. But also to maybe slow down the pace. Also ensure that working with the interpreter, you have those visual cues or key, I'm going to be saying something now, or you take over now, etc. So a lot of preparation. Make sure that you work together effectively to be able to draw the audience and engage the audience effectively.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Okay, Louisa, you have some thoughts on this. Have you experienced in this before?
I've actually done this myself, being multilingual. I had the opportunity where I've had to do a bit of Chinese and a bit of English, and I'm not gonna deny it's very hard, even for me translating between it. And I can say I'm almost native tongue in both, and yet I found myself lost in translation for certain tools, certain techniques, certain ways of working. And I guess it's being very mindful that you have to then communicate in multiple ways so that you're not just hung up on the words that's coming out, whether it is English, Chinese, or the other language, and to find formats and tools that works for the whole group that is more universal. And it's things where it's the counting, and it's the things where they've got the post-it notes, they've got their dots, and the things where it breaks away from just the language barrier so that you can use other tools and techniques to help you with that. But I don't deny it is a lot more difficult. And the thing that Julian picked up, it takes a lot more time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And I think taking a lot more time is one of the points I would like to mention before we move on to Malini. Patience, everybody, in this process. Okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes things do not necessarily translate well between different languages, and some languages, sadly, are further apart than others. Some languages don't even have words or terminology for some of the things that you might be, for example, trying to facilitate on in English, right? So, and this is true in the reverse as well for many languages. So patience is a really, really important point here. But the second important point Louisa mentioned is using other visual aids, cues, tools, and so on to get the message across. It can be done, but very difficult. Malini, what are your thoughts?
I think everyone has raised some great points. And what I'd like to add is that if you're working with people, from different language groups, chances are they're actually from a different cultural mindset. And so, what Louisa was alluding to earlier about using different formats, it becomes even more important because the power dynamics might actually be different in a different context, or the degree of comfort with uncertainty and open-ended questions that might be different, right? And you would actually have to, as a facilitator, you actually have to make sure that you actually understand and you become comfortable with the cultural language, so that you can help everyone to participate effectively.
Totally agree with you, Malini. Thanks for raising the cultural aspect. It is such an important aspect to deal with and think about here. Yeah. Different nationalities, folks from all over the world definitely perceive things differently, right? And the power dynamics that you just mentioned, it's such an important element. If we were doing this in the USA versus doing it in South Africa, it would be very different from doing it in China or India or even Australia, and certainly in Central Europe. People can be much more direct in some of these environments. Other people can be absolutely the opposite of that, right? And they will just feel threatened in those environments rather than participate or, creating a welcome environment. So you have to set that neutral tone beforehand. And coming back to what somebody said earlier, everybody said earlier, actually, preparation, right? Very, very key in this. But from what we've spoken about so far, it sounds like a facilitator needs to be almost the perfect person. Yeah, they need to have patience. They need to be culturally aware. All of this is very, very difficult. Okay? Multilingual. Anyhow, thanks everybody. I think questions are stacking up, so let's move on to our next question.
Our next question is from Rakesh. How can I manage group dynamics, particularly when there are few dominant individuals who tend to monopolize the discussion?
Probably one of the most common things that happens in a group facilitation environment. Laurie, you've had experience with this.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, really good question. Thanks, Rakesh. So this is really one of the sort of more active roles that a facilitator has, is really making sure there are good, healthy group dynamics. And it is very good to have those who are outspoken, who are very expressive verbally, because sometimes they can be a catalyst to getting conversation going. So it's a very positive thing. And it really is about finding that balance and just making sure that if they're being too dominant or if they're taking up too much of the available time to the group, inviting other participants who might be a little bit more introverted in their nature and not so expressive, but inviting other people and giving them the opportunity to contribute and participate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a real challenge, right? Even as a trainer, this is a challenge. And I think everybody on this panel is a trainer. Okay, but even as a trainer, Louisa, I'll come to you next. This can be a big, big problem, right? And how to control the group. So I think let's hear what Louisa has to say, and then we'll hear from Julian, then Malini.
I just want to say, if all ends fails, I have my talking stick, and it's always whoever's holding it gets to talk, so that the people who are dominating needs to have some shush time.
I agree. Completely agree with you. Okay, Julian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we always have those people who love to hear themselves talking. But what is very important is to actually set clear expectations at the beginning of a session, whether it be a meeting, whether it be a workshop, whatever we're doing. Express very clearly to all the participants that you want to have everybody contributing, and so that you do have Joe Soap in the little corner also providing their responses, because they might have the answer, and it's really important. And so provide that, maybe even do things like having a round robin approach to people contributing, where you then make sure that people will progressively provide some kind of input as well, which is quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Round robin approaches definitely work. Malini, what are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, I've just had a blank moment there. But coming back, Julian, thank you so much for mentioning expectations, because that's my go-to approach. Being 5 foot and a woman of color in Australia, quite often I've learned the very hard way. I mean, how you can actually deal with dominant individuals. And one of the things I've realized is that they often don't realize they're being dominant. Right? A lot of them don't actually realize that. So when we set clear expectations at the start, and then throughout the session, when you do notice, a few of them are trying to dominate, you can almost playfully sort of engage them to help you bring others into the conversation. So use them to help meet the expectations that we've all agreed to for the event. Right? And you will find that having a number of different ways in which to elicit responses is also very helpful. So the talking stick is a great tool, but when you have some dominant individuals in some cultures, people who are in lower positions, in the organization will simply shut up. They will not speak up, even if you did give them the talking stick. So if you have alternative approaches like using post-it notes, or if it's a hybrid meeting, encourage people to post their comments in chat and read those comments and involve them that way. I think that might also be quite helpful.
Yeah, Malini, absolutely. All very, very good points from everybody on this. This is a real challenge, particularly for an organization where you are facilitating a group of people that involves upper or C-level executives in a environment where you have non-C-level executives or middle managers or lower level managers in the same meeting, and you're trying to achieve an outcome. It's a natural tendency for the upper management or C-level execs to want to dominate the whole thing. And it kind of like the rest of the people expect that to be the case as well. So to try to elicit decent and good info to come out of those folks, very difficult indeed. One of the techniques I've found is to break them up into very small groups. Okay. So to partner a powerful person, typically a strong personality person with somebody who isn't a strong personality in pairs. And the pair of them then can work together, right? Now, obviously, setting expectations is very, very clear. You need to do that. But if you put all of the folks that would naturally gravitate towards one another together, it just never works, right? You'll have one group coming back with all the information that they think you want to hear, and the other group will come back with very little. So pairing them off does sometimes help into smaller groups. It's more work for you, though, as a facilitator, as you have to jump around between all these small meetings and set the expectations, make sure you're getting the outcomes you're looking for. But always a difficult thing to manage. So some good advice, and I love Louisa's talking stick. It really is a classic. How long have you had that talking stick, Louisa?
Too long. I should use it on my kids.
Well, you're going to get some practice soon, I'm sure, with that. So, all right. Thank you very much. Suchitra, let's move on if we don't mind.
We have a live question from Dan. What tips do you have for connecting with the people at the beginning of the session?
This is such an important part, right, of the session. The first start of the meeting, when people are sitting there together, is really, really critical. Let's start with Julian, then we'll come to Laurie.
The thing, what I like about the facilitation is that we are working with people. If you're going to be training, yes, there's subject content, and you need to know your content, etc. But when you're looking at facilitation, you're dealing with people. So one of the nice things is to be, Louisa did it nicely earlier. She said, I speak a number of different languages. So I like making jokes, or I like telling a personal story. And then people start to connect a little bit because you're talking about some experience or some understanding or some interaction that relates to people, and people like people. And so that helps to set a really, really good tone at the beginning of a session as well.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. Laurie, what are your thoughts?
So I agree with Julian. Yeah, so incorporating some sort of an icebreaker at the start of a session, usually something that either involves you sharing something a bit fun or a bit vulnerable about yourself, or another one is that anything that makes people have to self-form into teams in some sort of a gaming environment is usually a good technique to use as well, just to lighten people up and get people engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good points. I think just some experiences I've had in this area as well, trying to make sure that folks are slightly out of their comfort zone, particularly going back to the previous question, when you have a bunch of strong personality people in the room and a bunch of not so strong, the quiet ones, trying to take some of them out of their comfort zone. You really want to bring them to a leveler. So coming up with some games that completely distract everybody to break the ice really does help. It really does help. Yeah. So that's a nice tip. Just want to give a shout out to our viewers here. We've got so many people watching online today. It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here. If you have any questions, and I can see that people are asking lots and lots of questions. If you have any questions, feel free to just pop them in the LinkedIn chat and our social team will get them over to you. Ella, great to have you here as usual. Angelo, hi, welcome from Italy. Welcome. Hope you are safe over there, by the way. Idara, hi, one of our Level Up regulars. Welcome again, Idara. So I think, we've got Gertrude as well here, also fantastic. Folks, lots of people from all over the world joining us for today's show. If you have any questions, don't forget, just pop them in and our team will get them over to this panel to answer live. All right. Suchitra, I believe that we have some more questions, so let's get moving.
We do indeed. We have another live question from AO. How effective is having interactive or breakout sessions to buttress the subject matter or session?
Good point. Good points. Io, hi, nice to see you here, by the way. So this is an interesting one. Let's start off with Malini and then hear from Laurie.
I think it's really important to offer a few different ways for the participants to connect with each other and to engage with whatever the subject or the topic of the session is, right? So from that perspective, I think having some options for interactive discussion or breakout sessions is really important, particularly if you're trying to these days we have the challenge of some people on site, in person, some people might be, joining us virtually. So if we can, create time for the different, people to interact with each other, it's a good thing. What I would caution against, though, is trying to squeeze in a breakout session just for the sake of doing it. So as a facilitator, I'd usually plan my session and I would go in with the plan, but I'd also be quite alert and open to changing my plan if required. So if the session's going really well and everyone's really participating very well, you don't necessarily need to, drop in a breakout session just because it's on your list of things to do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Don't force a breakout room if you don't absolutely need one. I think it's a lot about gauging for yourself how well it's going in your main facilitation session. And then it can be one of those really handy ways to break the ice or to split up stronger personality people, as I said earlier. But try to think about if you really, really need one in that session. Absolutely. So I think, Laurie, we were coming to you next from memory, and then Julian.
Oh, I don't have a whole lot to add other than what Malini said, actually. I guess the only thing I would add is that there's a different level of intimacy that you create with these breakout rooms. So if you've got a group of 20 and suddenly you create groups of 5, suddenly the interaction between people changes. And then if you even break into pairs, for example, there's a more sort of direct interaction that can happen. And sometimes you can help bring people out of their shell if they might be fairly quiet and reserved in a room full of 20. They can feel like they can contribute and participate more in the smaller groups. So, yeah, a lot of very effective uses for breakout rooms, though you wouldn't create them just for the sake of it. Certainly they should have an overall purpose.
Yeah. Makes sense, definitely. Julian, you would like to add something?
Yeah. I mean, exactly as Laurie and Malini said, it's really about changing the dynamic a little bit as well. It might be getting a little stale in the bigger group, or only certain people are asking questions. And when you create a breakout group, now you're forcing people into a smaller environment. They may be more willing to contribute a little bit. And then when they come back, you'll see there's a greater participation again, and it helps to just change that dynamic a little bit. I like breakout rooms, particularly because I use it with a case study, and then we have questions within the case study. And so, I like breakout rooms. They also help to wake people up in the afternoons. That's a very important one as well.
That is a good point. Yeah, you can't sit there sleeping in a small intimate breakout room. Very good point. Louisa, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, and I think all the panelists has caught on to it. I think the answer for this question really is it depends. And I think it's really up to the facilitator to be constantly scanning the floor. And I think the facilitator has to be constantly going, do we actually need it at this point in time? And so we all know the benefits of having them. It's just about whether we need to run it or not.
Yeah. Very, very well articulated, Louisa. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. You have to be able to read the room. You have to be able to understand what the dynamic is between the different folks in the room. Yeah? Sometimes putting them into breakout rooms to do a task or perform an exercise that you know that all of those people that you put into that room will not know how to do, and they have to work together to achieve a common goal, can be a great icebreaker. Putting somebody who's on the shop floor, for example, in with upper management, to do something that is related to an upper management task will achieve nothing. Yeah, absolutely nothing. Vice versa. So sometimes, though, it's better to just put people into a room with a completely should we say, unique task that neither of them would feel comfortable doing, just for the sake of it, because it breaks the ice. It makes them start to think about working together to achieve that common goal. Yeah. So interesting question. All right, Suchitra, may we move on, please?
Our next question is from Louisa. What is the one favorite tool or technique from each of the panelists?
I love these kind of questions. I think we're going to jump around here. Louisa, I'm going to come to you last, if you don't mind. Okay, so you can add yours in. I think let's start with Malini, then we'll move to Laurie, and then Julian.
My favorite technique, hands down, my favorite technique. It's called yes and it originates from comedy, like improv, right? Where you might have seen shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway, and so on. And there's actually a book called Yes and I'll pop the link in the chat for you to look up afterwards. Basically, what it is we often have a tendency when people make suggestions, our brain immediately starts to say no, but, right? But instead of doing that, you consciously actually say yes and. So kind of building off on their idea or leveraging on their idea, and it's actually you can have a lot of fun with it in a comedy situation, but in a workshop or a brainstorming session, you can actually use that to really extend people's ideas and link disparate concepts and so on, and come up with some really fantastic outcomes. So yes and is my favorite.
Okay. Laurie, yes and.
That's excellent. So I just learned a very helpful tool from Malini, because my favorite is the brainstorming session. So I really love helping teams be more creative, more innovative, think out of the box, do things in a different way. And often that involves making people safe when they come up with an idea that is quite left field, so that others aren't judging them, because it really is about open-minded thinking, and it doesn't matter how valid some of the suggestions are, as long as people are thinking in an open-minded way. So using that yes and technique in response to people's suggestions during a brainstorming session sounds fantastic. So I've learned something from this. Thank you, Malini.
Excellent. I'm learning as every day. Every time I'm on one of these shows, I learn so much. All right, Julian.
Yeah, I like that. I like visual things. I think that old adage of a picture is worth 1,000 words is really good. So I like visual aids, and I like when people working together, using a flip chart, using a whiteboard, using sticky notes, whatever it is, creating some kind of visual presentation of something, and what it does, it becomes memorable. People remember a picture. People remember a caricature or something like that, and I like using visual aids or using visual facilitation as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Louisa, you raised the question. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and thank you, panelists, for letting me ask you guys and pick your brains. And I think that's the thing as a facilitator. You can never have enough in your toolkit bag, and you want to just keep absorbing and asking people what else they use and what's their favorite tool, and to add to your own toolkit bag. You want to have the Mary Poppins bags ever to just pull out stuff. But my favorite, and I think I will keep post-it notes in business, is the fact that I do want everybody to get equal say. And I want everybody to get that chance. And I think even during COVID, you could still do this digitally, online. There was still a lot of boards where you could put a post-it note up and everyone could still see it and share it. And I still think it's one of the best tools and techniques where people get equal share, and you say 10 minutes, dump whatever you need and just put it up there, and then to talk through it. So thank you, panelists, for sharing with me your tools and techniques as well.
Fantastic. I think that we've had some great tools and techniques here today. I'll add in a couple more if you don't mind. There's actually a little roll of paper that you can buy. It's actually more like plastic, but it sticks to the wall in a static way. Yeah. So it's quite
clean
fine.
Sheets.
Exactly. Clean sheets, right, exactly. Roll it out. You can literally cover all the walls with it and it's a great place to put those sticky notes. Yeah. Really, really helps very, very well, right? Because quite often, while I love the whiteboard, but the whiteboards often end up being too small if you've got a larger group of people. You need a lot of whiteboard space. Yeah. And flip charts are nice, but whiteboards are so much more fun, right? With multicolored pens and sticky notes and magnets and things like that. If you like me though, you like some technology in play. There are things called online tools like MindMeister. Yeah, these are really, really great tools because you can use those for mind mapping, and especially in those brainstorming sessions that Laurie, was speaking about. If you have a large 4K monitor, it's really, really handy. Okay, to project the mind map. And you can actually go out and project that mind map. People can work on different parts of the mind map and they can put in their ideas and link them. So those kind of tools really, really work quite well, depending on the setting, of course, if you have that technology available to do that. So, all right. I think we are ready to move on, everybody. So let's take our next question. Oh, sorry. I think, Malini, you wanted to add something back. Sorry, my apologies.
Thanks, Nigel. Julian and Laurie both mentioned visual techniques. So I just wanted to say for those of our, listeners who, like me, find drawing very challenging. I failed art all through school, right? And then when I started working and I realized how important it is to have good visual facilitation skills, it was actually pretty scary for me. Until I found two things, and I thought I'll share these two resources. One is I read a book called Back of the Napkin by Dan Rohn. And again, we'll share that in the chat. So he takes you through some very simple techniques that you can employ to be able to draw quite well. And the other one is I learned a technique called Bicablo, which is a German technique specifically for visual facilitation. And I can't tell you how much fun it is and how incredibly empowering it is. So I'll share the information about those two things with all of you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Malini. And I'm sure our audience will appreciate those as well. If you pop them into the chat, then we'll get them out to LinkedIn and YouTube so people can view them too. If anybody on the panel, by the way, if you want to recommend a book or a technique or a link to it, just pop it into the chat and we'll make sure that we get it out to everybody. All right, I can see the questions are really stacking up now. So lots of live questions coming in. So Suchitra, may we move on?
Sure. Our next question is from Steve. What is the maximum group size I can facilitate alone? Or when do you recommend a second facilitator?
Very, very good question, this. How many people is it sort of effective with? Yeah, very, very interesting question. I think it depends on the individual, to be honest, okay? And it also depends on the group. So this is one of those slightly it depends answers. What is the topic? If it's a contentious topic, if it's you've got a bunch of people who are really, really strong personalitied and some not so much, it can be quite tricky to do it alone. Louisa, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Steve, just so you know, there is a textbook answer, which actually tells you in the book exactly calculated, formulated, based on things like how big is your group size, how well is your group versed with the certainty that they've got, how process aware are they. So there's quite a few things in here that calculates it for you. But I'm going to be honest, I'm not the best with textbook answers. I think it's actually going to be up to the facilitator as well. There are times that I have told clients that I'm happy to do a very, very large group. And my version of large is different to somebody else's version of large. And so I have to be comfortable with what group I'm also going to get. So I might have worked with this group before as well. So I might know this client very well. So I'm okay with getting 50 people that I know very well. But if I don't know these 50 people, then there's no way in hell that I'm going to say I'm going to take on a large group. So then I would then go back to what I believe is my maximum that I can take on from my experience. And I'm not going to lie here. There's probably times when I've taken more than I could chew. So I've taken a workshop size that was way larger than what I could have handled on my own. And at that point, I might actually ask someone in the audience to be a co-facilitator with me. And I might have that conversation up front as well to see if there was somebody else that wanted to put their hand up and co-facilitate. So I think when, as a facilitator, and you are scanning the floor and you've noticed maybe I have taken on more than I can chew, you might want to see what else you can do on the spot to change it up. So you might change up where you go into smaller groups, and those smaller groups then host themselves as well, so that it helps you out as well. So you may have to change the dynamics if you were facilitating alone on a group that was too big. But I would always say you would have your magic number, your own magic number of what you believe you can do. And then when you believe you've hit that magic number, you should consider your second facilitator.
Yeah, very, very sound advice there, Louisa. Thank you. You're quite right. It can be very, very, I would say, counterproductive to have far too many people way past your comfort zone. You will not perform at your best as a facilitator. You will not get the outcomes from what you're looking for. The company or organization you're dealing with will not feel that they got value from it. So you're not doing them much of a service by taking on a large group, particularly if you don't know the group and it's more than you can chew, as you say. Malini, I think you had something, and then we'll move to Laurie.
I just wanted to say, Steve, you might actually, consider this as part of your planning, depending on what activities you have, right? So if you have a group that's more than 15 and, you're planning on doing specific activities with them, then you might consider having a second or even a third facilitator just for those. And Louisa said that you could even call upon actual participants. But on the other hand, you can actually plan for this in advance. If you're doing this for a client organization, you could actually ask them, do they have anyone who actually is keen to improve their facilitation skills, who might be willing to help you, right? Or if you are an employee of an organization and you're facilitating a session, you might actually reach out to people like, say, business analysts, who often have really good workshop facilitation skills, and you might ask them, or change managers, for example, you might ask them to help you just with those activities, if not the whole session.
Yeah, some really, really sound advice there. Absolutely. I like the idea of involving the organization and some of the key people from it, because it definitely creates a bit more of an integrated group where people can participate. So, Laurie, what are your final thoughts on this before we move on?
So once again, I agree with everything Malini said. And I guess the other thing is to consider the complexity of the issue. If you're planning for something that's very complex or risky, then it might warrant a larger group size. So for me personally, beyond 20 is a limit. And even as part of that process, it's not about having as many people as possible, but making sure that there's the right mix of diverse interest groups so that you can have an inclusive workshop so that you can facilitate. And as a facilitator, one of your roles is to make sure that you're being very inclusive of your participants. And for me, when it gets beyond 20, it becomes very difficult without drawing in extra support and resources from wherever you can.
Yeah. I think 20 is definitely quite a strong limit on that as well. All right. I can see we've got so many questions and very unfortunately very little time left. So I think we've got time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. if we're quick. So, Suchitra, what is our next question?
We have another live question from AO. How do you control your voice or tonality while delivering a session? And are jokes acceptable during a session?
Okay, this is a really interesting question, Ayo. Okay. And I think there's a lot to this. If you think about this very carefully, how your mood is going into a session will affect the way that you're going to intonate your voice, right? So many different things can affect you. You could have been stuck in traffic for 2 hours on the way to the session. You arrive at the session, you're a little bit late, you're flustered. How do you make sure that you achieve your inner peace before you begin? Malini, let's hear from you first.
You're spot on, Nigel. I think where your emotion goes, there your voice follows, right? So I think it's really important to take a deep breath, be self-aware. I think facilitators actually need to have really good emotional intelligence skills, right? So, sometimes even during the session, there could be a heated exchange of words, and it's really important for the facilitator to remain calm and, not have to raise your voice and so on. At the same time, you also need to speak in a way that's interesting and engaging. So if you have a deadpan, sort of monotonous voice, it doesn't convey fun. It doesn't encourage people to actually participate in the conversation. So you do need to keep a check on how you're feeling. If you're feeling nervous and so on, this should be part of your preparation. Prepare to deal with your fears or your anxiety, while you're in the session, and you should be okay. The second part of your question, Ayo, really, really important point. Thank you for raising it. Are jokes acceptable during a session? And the answer really is it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on what the joke is. As a rule, I think we can safely say that if the joke is, could be could hurt someone, whether they are present in the session or not, then it is not acceptable, right? It is never acceptable. But if it is something that's politically correct, that might actually set a nice a tone, and encourage people to sort of shed their inhibitions and participate more actively, then I think it's all right. But you need to be really careful with the use of humor in the workplace.
Malini, such sound advice. Really fantastic for okay, I think let's hear from Louisa next, and then we'll move on to Julian after that. Okay.
Yeah, this is actually something Malini picked up before. It's about culture. And I think culturally, depending on who you're engaging in the room as well, jokes, your tone of voice. I'm sure you guys are aware, South Africans, if you had a bunch of South Africans in the room, there's no way I'm going to speak softly to them. I'm going to tell you that now. And then I can see Nigel agreeing. And then some cultures just don't take jokes. They won't. Yeah. And they think that in the workplace, it is prime and proper. We're not here to joke about. We're here to just get the job done. But I know when I'm doing it with a local bunch in Australia, I can joke like there's no tomorrow. So I guess it depends also on culture as well. So I think that's quite an important point that Malini had picked up before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Culture is so critical in this for sure. Julian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the two biggest words that came out is context and depends, and it's mentioned a couple of times already. With tone, it really you need to learn to read the room. I do a lot of virtual training, and I'm doing training across the world, and so I'm working with lots of cultures, lots of languages, time zone challenges that we also have with that. And I always try and at the outset of my training, a lot of the time in facilitation, I try and find out something interesting about people. I love traveling, and I love geography, and I love languages and people. I want to know what people's names mean, etc. And by doing that kind of connections, I can sometimes joke about it also, as long as it's appropriate, very importantly. But most of the time, I'll always joke about myself first, or let myself be the brunt of a joke if I'm going to be using any of that. I'm a very sort of gregarious person, so I love the jokes and things like that. But it's about understanding the the context very important, and it's very much a depends. And sometimes I'll just go through content and learning and training because that's the focus, but it's also making sure you understand that you're doing it appropriately as well.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Laurie, I think you had your hand up as well. So final thoughts from you on this one.
Oh, not much to add really, other than that as a facilitator, you sort of have this natural leadership role within the room. So it is particularly important to really control your tone and your delivery, because you really do have such a wide influence on the room, and it really is important to keep people feeling safe, encouraged, and very open. And lastly, I agree with Julian. If you're going to make jokes and you're unsure about the water, make them about yourself, because it's also a good way of showing vulnerability and making yourself maybe a little bit more relatable to people as well.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. There are, just to come back on the part of should you be making jokes, and how to coin a phrase, to switch yourself on, right? If you arrive in the wrong frame of mind, there are a bunch of techniques that actors use to change their mindset just before they go on camera. Okay. Now, this isn't about performing, but those same techniques can be applied to this environment as well, to ensure that you arrive in the session and start it in the right tone. Okay? So just Google that, because I don't have a link on the top of my head, but there are a lot of techniques that they do use. And the Actors Guild in the US, I think, has quite a few sort of posts and forums about that sort of stuff. How do you make sure you're in the right frame of mind to begin this session? So, and just the culture element is so critical. Okay, I think we will take our final question if we're all very brief. Okay, Suchitra.
So our last question is from Annie. Is there a handbook, training, and certification to become a facilitator?
Okay. Well, this is definitely an interesting question. I think we covered a little bit of this earlier, but yes, we do. Louisa, tell us about the certification.
There is a certification, foundation and practitioner level. But I'm going to say to you, I actually think even if you're not a facilitator, even if you just run workshops and normal meetings, day-to-day meetings, this is still a very good, handy little competency to have, because you still want to know, how do I write a good agenda? How do I make sure people are engaged in my meetings? How do I understand that I'm going to have different dynamics in there? So even if you don't do facilitation as a living and you're not going out to client just running conferences and workshops, you still want this type of soft skill for your day-to-day running of meetings and day-to-day working with your teams.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. This is it. I think that just having the skill of a facilitator is such a critical thing for any kind of meeting, any style of meeting that you're involved in. I think it will make you a better person when it comes to handling your work colleagues and achieving better outcomes, whatever that goal might be, right? So definitely, in my opinion, this is a core skill to have for any person, particularly so if you're working in an agile environment. Yeah. An agile environment is very, very much about facilitation. In my mind, the two of them go hand in hand together. And if you're a change manager, this is another core skill that you should be absolutely looking at doing. So fantastic stuff. All right, I think we have come, unfortunately, to the end of time for today's show. So what I'd like to do is just walk around the panel and get your closing remarks. So Julian, what are your final thoughts on today's session?
I enjoy facilitation because it's a fantastic way of communicating and being able to deliver something. But I think very importantly, you need to plan and you need to practice and get feedback. Am I delivering a message eloquently? Am I delivering a message and articulating effectively? So, getting feedback from others is really, really important, and it builds your skill and you become more confident and be able to facilitate excellently.
Good points. Thanks, Julian. Laurie, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to participate, and thank you, fellow panelists. I learned so much from you. For me, facilitation, our world is becoming more complex. Our projects are becoming more complex. Everything we're dealing with is becoming more complex. So to have the ability to facilitate, to be able to go into events with the intent to get the best in others instead of getting your own point of view, an extremely valuable skill set. So I definitely encourage those of you who are curious about it to. I'm going to look into the certification, the APMG one that Louisa mentioned. I think it's a really valuable career path to consider.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laurie. Louisa, what are your final thoughts?
It's been very fun today because facilitation is fun. And I think people should just put their hand up to facilitate more. And I think be brave, be bold, just get out there and try it. So don't always just be the person that's sitting in the back of the room for a meeting or for a workshop. Just put your hand up and go, actually, can I facilitate the next one?
Yeah. That's really such good advice to do that. Don't be shy, get involved, start doing it. It's a lot of fun when you get to know how to do it. And, I think if you're a shy person who typically wouldn't naturally do this, extend yourself, start looking at how you could facilitate small sessions with people that you feel comfortable with, and then you can grow from there. That's probably the best advice I could give you. Malini, what are your final thoughts?
So much for having me on Level Up again. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So big thank you to our producer listeners and to all the members of the panel. Something that I did not get an opportunity to touch on earlier is about the art of asking great questions. That is something that a good facilitator needs to have. You'll find lots of good books and YouTube videos on the topic. But as Laurie said, a facilitator doesn't have to be a subject matter expertise, and he's absolutely right. But we absolutely need to know the right questions to ask to bring out the expertise that is in the room. So focus on cultivate. If you want to start somewhere, a small place to start is learn to ask great questions.
Malini, that is such an important thing, and I'm so glad you raised it, really. Asking the right questions, not only that, but asking the right questions at the right time in the session, because timing is everything as well. That is so critical to achieving the right outcomes on this, so critical. So it's been my honor to be able to facilitate today's discussion, I must say. I really, really enjoyed it. And I learned a lot, as I always do, doing this. Wonderful. So I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists and to our viewers online. And thanks for submitting such great questions and your wonderful answers. All right. So I think looking forward, we've got quite a few things on the agenda. But before we get there, over on our website, sorry, I did forget one thing. Suchitra, my humble apologies. It's just, lack of practice on my part. No excuses. What are your final thoughts?
No problem. I enjoyed today's show and some great takeaways, some great props from Louisa. The talking stick was amazing. And of course, the yes and the technique which Malini mentioned is something great. So thank you to our viewers and our producers for submitting great questions.
Absolutely. And once again, my humble apologies, Suchitra. But thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your input. All right. So well done, everybody. Over on our website, you can search for the answers to over 1,800 questions. It is a great, comprehensive, free resource, connects you with over 200 experts from around the world. Don't forget, you can also listen to the audio podcasts, on your preferred podcast platform, which is really handy. Also, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really doesn't cost you anything, but it helps folks discover our content. All right, so we've got quite an action-packed week coming up, actually. So on Friday the 26th at 2 o'clock, we've got looking at the impact of artificial intelligence in project and service management. That is a German language episode. Monday the 29th is a public holiday, so we'll be taking a short break. Monday, the 2nd of June, though, at 8 a.m. GMT, we're looking at what to look for in the best cybersecurity training. All of those details are on APMG. So looking forward to the next show. Just subscribe to the show. We'll send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you can join us here on the panel. So level up your career with APMG. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next show.